So, 2 years ago, Elden Ring came out, and just a few weeks ago, its DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, dropped. Everyone's in pretty unanimous agreement that the DLC was pretty damn good, although not at first, which was interesting. The difficulty spike from the base game to the DLC was just so crazy that people were genuinely turned away, and were leaving bad reviews those first few days, but things seem to have leveled off, and everyone's pretty much happy with the Land of Shadows. Even if getting that final little map piece right there was more annoying than walking through the Lake of Rot, and with that, yeah, Elden Ring is just done. As much as this is Dark Souls 2, it's not getting as much DLC as the game did. No, we're getting the Dark Souls 1 one and done treatment for this. It even included the same difficulty spike as Artorias of the Abyss. Well, that is if you were a pyromancer playing Artorias of the Abyss, aka, you know, me. Except this took 2 years, but overall I'd say it was pretty worth it. With everything said and done, it does leave one lingering question though on the minds of most Fromsoft fans, and of course that question is,
can you beat Elden Rings as balls?
And what's next for Elden Ring? You know, even as I write this script, even as I'm reading these lines out, I can't shake the feeling that I said something like Dark Souls 4. Something about the idea of a potential Elden Ring 2 seems goofy by nature. Like, what do you mean Elden Ring 2? That's like saying there's gonna be a new Shadow Tower right around the corner. But you know, why not? Why not Elden Ring 2? Elden Ring was so successful, it made people start talking about Dark Souls as if it was some obscure series and not a pillar of 7th generation gaming. Now, that's not to say Elden Ring is FromSoft's most successful game ever. No, apparently that's Monster Hunter Diary with a whopping 60 million sold. What? You know, even though I already typed that and I'm reading it out a few days after typing it, I'm still gonna have to fact check that one because I just don't believe it. I'm putting it up on the screen right now. Is that true, future me? Did I lie to myself? Am I wrong? Is Monster Hunter Diary really the biggest FromSoft game ever made? So while Elden Ring will never outsell Game of the Century Monster Hunter Diary, and as far as I can tell, it hasn't outsold some of the previous Soulsborne games just yet, I think it's safe to say with the popularity of Elden Ring, it's gonna close its gap on those few Soulsborne games in front of it real soon. Those other Soulsborne games really only being ahead because of age. So if you want to just see me convince you that Elden Ring 2 is possible, just skip to later in the video. I'll put the timestamp up right here. But I want to talk about how this would actually work in the world of Elden Ring. So let's say John Dark Souls goes onto Twitter tomorrow and says Elden Ring 2 is already in development. What is the game gonna be about? I mean, the endings of Elden Ring are pretty final, right? Well, maybe not. So I won't pretend that I have the world's most firm grasp on the Elden Ring lore. I'm an Elder Scrolls lore man first, FromSoft fan second, but I got a good enough grasp on what's happening here, so bear with me. But even if I didn't have, you know, any grasp on the story whatsoever, I mean, I won, I'm Elden Lord now, or Ronnie's, you know, trophy husband, or a firehead man made of frenzied flame. Either way, things seem pretty final, but who's to say? I do think it's safe to say that the Dung Eater ending isn't at all the true ending, so yeah. And when discussing the endings, I honestly don't think the two other versions of the default ending, the Perfect Order and the Dusk ending, are really that important to the conversation overall. So just sort of push those to a side, keep them in mind obviously, but when I'm talking about this, let's just look at these three. In the default one, you take charge of things, but the status quo stays the same-ish. The Greater Will still has its fingies firmly planted in the lands between. The Age of Stars has you uproot the Golden Order and replace it with whatever Ronnie is yapping about. I don't know, I trust her. Whatever her plan is about, it's blue, it's pleasantly cool apparently, it sounds good to me, and you get to become her trophy husband, and also you're still a god or something. All around good ending, like it, I'm not gonna lie. And then there's the Frenzied Flame ending, beloved by a weird amount of people, where you just end the world for some reason. I mean, hey, this place was pretty unforgiving, but I wouldn't have turned everything into a ball of chaos fire, but maybe that's just me. Side note, what's weirder about this ending is how the people who love it talk about it. They talk about it as if it was in fact the canon ending, as if the game has a little pop-up message that says canon ending achieved. It doesn't have that, but that's how they talk about it. It's real weird. Like whenever you bring up Elden Ring 2, these guys come out and say not possible because the world ends at the end of it. Like, who told you this was the right one? Does your dad work at FromSoft or something? Anyway, out of the three, it honestly seems that most people either go for the Age of Stars or the Frenzied Flame ending, because while being Elden Lord sounds nice, something's gotta change. I mean, look what the greater will did to my boy Blythe. I can't let that stand. Also, I mean, I really don't want a direct connection to the fingies. Honestly, I just don't want them around anymore, man. Look at them. So yeah, the two most popular endings that don't include the edits of the default ending involve changing things, so to speak. What does that mean for a potential Elden Ring 2? Well, Fromsoft could go in two directions, either a direct follow-up with a setting in the Age of Stars, or somehow after the Frenzied Flame, despite that having you end the world forever. Who really knows, though? Something might have come out of this chaos. Or they could go the Dark Souls route and set the game really, really far after Elden Ring 1, after the Age of Stars, or the Age of Fracture, or the Age of everything being on fucking fire. I mean, it worked for Dark Souls, it can work on Elden Ring, and I think they really could do something cool with that idea. Setting the game so far after the previous one could really let them change things up with maybe a new Outer God. I mean, think about it. Why not let a new Outer God get its hands on the lands between? Have them shape it into a new map for us to play in, and then, of course, we gotta go kill its host, just like in Elden Ring 1. I mean, there are so many Outer Gods that could do this job, and there's potentially more that we don't even know about right now. Hell, maybe this time we could kill the Outer God itself. Why not? No shade on Dark Souls, but its art direction doesn't really change much throughout the series. But here, in Elden Ring 2, it could. Like, more than half of everything, from the magic, to the buildings, to the armor, to the enemies, to the giant tree that can be seen at all times, are related to the Golden Order. This is all very important iconography to the art direction of Elden Ring, but in a world where, I don't know, the Blood Star is now the Outer God in charge, things would obviously have to change in terms of art direction now, wouldn't they? I mean, instead of having a giant glowing tree the entire time, we'd have a giant red glowing Blood Star. Which, I mean, sounds pretty daunting, but so does the Eclipse thingy in Dark Souls 3, and everyone loves that now, don't we? I think it's safe to say that Elden Ring tonally might be one of the lightest in the series of Soulsborne games. I mean, everything is just so bright, even when it's dark, it's not as dark as, you know, the Tomb of the Giants or anything. It's just overall a more positive game. I mean, we even have, like, good endings. Sure, I mean, you could dung eater everything, but you don't have to do that. Meanwhile, even Dark Souls' good ending is still pretty bad in the short term. In the long term, it's what's best for the world, but in the short term, things are really gonna suck. So maybe Elden Ring 2 could be the opposite of Elden Ring 1. Really, really dark and depressing, with a much more oppressive atmosphere a la Dark Souls 3. And that's what I would imagine with something like the Blood Star being in charge. The only issue I find with this idea is just how iconographically important the Erdtree is to Elden Ring. Like I said, the majority of the art direction ties directly into the Erdtree and the Greater Will and the Golden Order and all that. Yeah, it's hard to imagine Elden Ring without a giant, massive, glowing tree around us at all times now, isn't it? But imagine if they went with something like the Twin Moon Outer God. That would go hard as hell. Imagine the entire game during dusk and twilight. There'd be two giant glowing moons hovering above the map. It'd be a bold change, but Fromsoft is pretty bold. I mean, they managed to get George R.R. Martin to actually write something. Really, all I'm asking for in this idea is a new aesthetic, a new map, and install the generic Fromsoft plot, and I'll be there day one. But who knows, maybe Elden Ring 2 will be just like Dark Souls 2. The plot will just come out of left field and nobody will see it coming. Outer Gods? No. This story is about making everyone die normally again in the Age of Stars, which I'd also take. You can really never know what these guys are about to do. I mean, did I think young Radahn using the body of Moog would be the final boss of the DLC? No, I did not. Moving away from just aesthetic ideas, there's still room for improvement on this open-world Souls formula. Miyazaki recently made a few statements on FromSoft's future endeavors. Two, notably. One being his openness to the idea of a more seamless co-op mode in the future, which people have been begging for since Elden Ring came out, and also that he feels that Elden Ring was close to his ideal RPG, but not exactly his magnum opus, so there's still room to cook, really. Something I'd kill to see return in the future is covenants. To this day, I think it's really weird that these weren't in Elden Ring, but were in all three Dark Souls. I mean, for such a massive open world, having little player factions seems ideal for expanding people's playtimes, but they just didn't put it in, which I feel is just funny because if you look back, everyone is just doing all this faction stuff in Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. Meanwhile, they're in reality just trapped in a little maze of a map. The Watchdogs of Farron in Dark Souls 3 literally defend this swamp area. This tiny swamp area. That would be so cool to do in Elden Ring, but instead you defend one of the millions of castle town ruins or something in the game. But speaking on something, what's FromSoft's take on this? I don't hear this sentiment that much anymore, but for the longest time, the Fromsoft community seemed to be suffering from this sort of mass psychosis. If you had asked the average From Software fan what's the studio's stance on sequels just a few years ago, they'd tell you that the studio would rather be liquidated than make more than one game with a single IP. This mindset was just so oddly common that it had been basically accepted as fact by a large majority of the fan. The sentiment has been mostly dispelled, seeing as, FromSoft's latest game is the 6th installment in a series that was considered pretty dead until now. It's also pretty funny that Fires of Rubicon is definitely not the 6th Armored Core game. Nah, the real 6th Armored Core game was released over 20 years ago. But anyway, this new game kind of really shut down that idea that FromSoft just hates making sequels to IPs for some reason. When really the idea should have been shut down because there was already like a million Armored Core games, but there was also, more popularly known 3 whole Dark Souls games. But the general consensus on that was that FromSoft was held at gunpoint to make all 3 of those instead of just the one. Which is odd because that was never said ever once. And it certainly doesn't come down to them not liking making multiple Souls games in the same IP, no. Because the grandfather of the Souls series, the progenitor of the Souls formula, has 5 installments in it. Yeah, there's 5 Kingsfield games if you smash the last 2 in the level editor together, counting as one game. And, more literally, there are 2 Shadow Tower games. Really wish they'd drop these on Steam or something because these look so good in such a old, stanky way. I'm just gonna blame Bloodborne fans for this general idea making the rounds. Of course, I do blame Bloodborne fans for everything that annoys me in life, because Bloodborne fans do in fact deserve nothing but the worst for how unfunny they are. Really though, I think it's safe to say FromSoft has no issues with making Elden Ring 2 or any sequels, although I'm pretty sure we're not going to get a Dark Souls 4. And even if you are still of the opinion that From Software was forced to make Dark Souls 2 and 3 because of the success of Dark Souls 1, well, let's force them to do it again because, it turned out for the best, didn't it? In reality, I have no idea where FromSoft is going to go from here. But Elden Ring is one of the most experimental games yet when it comes to tweaking the Souls formula. This game added an open world, a heavier focus on character stories, a more easily comprehensible plot, which was a big step for all of us being able to actually understand what was going on. Crazy, I know. Added spirit ashes, stakes of Marika, combined pyromancy and miracles, gave us a mode of transportation, and just a bunch of other stuff to change up how things were done. I could easily see Elden Ring being sort of a testing ground series where new ideas are messed with that'll be later used in different games, like seamless co-op or something. I think it's important to remember when talking about theoretical future games like Elden Ring 2 or something, is FromSoft is a company with more than Miyazaki working there. For all we know, Elden Ring 2 could be helmed by a completely different director. It is Dark Souls 2 too, after all. Now, that might not happen because Elden Ring 2 could be that ideal RPG he wants to make, but at the same time, we do know the guy loves to make new IPs, so I could definitely see him handing off Elden Ring to another director like he did Dark Souls 2. Especially because in those recent statements I made reference to a few minutes ago, Miyazaki said that FromSoft fans should expect more games out of the studio that aren't directed by him. Now, maybe that spells doom and gloom for some of you, but I'ma say it, Dark Souls 2 is pretty damn good. Is it the best? Absolutely not in the slightest at all. But if Elden Ring 2 was the Dark Souls 2 of Elden Ring, I'd be perfectly happy with it in terms of quality, and also in terms of just how weird it would be. Not enough people talk about that. Everyone is always arguing about if Dark Souls 2 is either the worst thing to ever happen or secretly the best Souls game ever made, when people should really be talking about just how weird it is. Like, this shit is strange. Obviously, there's weirdness in everything From Software makes. Just look at all this stuff I'm putting on screen right now. But, Dark Souls 2 is just a weird vibe in general. I'd happily play a strange Elden Ring. Elden Ring 2 probably isn't the next game out of From Software, though. I think FromSoft is gearing up to push out a bunch of different types of games, just like how they used to. They weren't always the Souls company. Look at all these other games they've made. I think everyone can agree that this is a pretty good thing to happen, unless you think they should be shackled in there making Dark Souls 4 for the rest of their life. But who doesn't want more From Software? But if Elden Ring isn't the next game, then what happens? Well, it's not Bloodborne 2 because that would mean that the PS5 would have to have games on it, and Sony would never allow that to happen. The only way we're getting more Bloodborne is if they make a Demon Souls remake of it and ruin the art direction and music direction for no reason. I think a lot of Sekiro fans for some reason have sort of dismissed the idea that a sequel to Sekiro can happen because they didn't make a new one right away, I guess. Like, guys, Sekiro 2 can still easily happen. You do know that this is what From Software's release order looks like, right? They've only released 2 games since Sekiro. Like, calm down, we can still get Sekiro Shadows Die Thrice. It's not asking for Shadow Tower 3 at this point. If not Elden Ring, I think what would be more interesting to see come out of FromSoft would be another game like Sekiro, but not literally Sekiro. I mean, that game is like taking a Souls Dex parry build with a katana and fleshing it out into its own combat system, and I want to see that, but with a different build from a Souls game. You know, Sekiro, but with a sorcery build. Now, come on, that goes so hard. I mean, magic in Souls games is already pretty great, but imagine if they made it the whole point. Finally, strength users would have to level into intelligence. Or, better yet, I'm going to be pretty brave when saying this, an entire game about the Fat Mesmir build. I know, I'm honestly the bravest man alive for suggesting this, but I think it could work. I think Sekiro, the Fat Mesmir build game, would be an instant win at the Product Placement Award. Anyway, with that random pot shot at the Game Awards, this video is done, and you know, a From Software video is kind of outside of my channel's wheelhouse, but that's sort of the point. I really do not want to get stuck talking about Elder Scrolls and Fallout, but I am still going to talk about those, especially the Elder Scrolls in the future. I just don't want to be stuck with it. Anyway, you should follow my Twitter and Newgrounds, especially if you like Elden Ring, because I drew a pretty fire Ronnie, if I do say so myself. Anyway, I'm out of here.